I'm Ty Edwards with the Kansas Studies Institute here at Johnson County Community College, and we are so excited to be here in person together. Ken Azumalt from Veterans and Military Student Services, close, okay, I got it, have been working on this project since 2017. And we have been recording oral histories with veterans, and we're really proud that our institution, we started this as a Humanities Kansas grant, but we have always focused on having student veterans interview. We started with employee veterans and then some employees and some community members. And so this is the first time we've been able to be back in person together since the pandemic. So it's really exciting, and we're so grateful that you are here. And if you happen to be here for extra credit, come see me at the end. Okay, so I want to thank Kenna. Kenna and I have a wonderful collaboration, and I'm so excited to get to work with her. But we are also so excited for our veterans. So our moderator of our panel is the wonderful Colonel Scott Weaver. And we are so fortunate. He has worked with us before, and he apparently enjoyed it because he's back, which we're excited for. Scott is a retired Army combat veteran who served as an infantry officer, strategist, and scholar. His strategic level assignments focused on Southwest Asia and Europe. He served 9 years on the faculties of the Army's 3 degree-granting institutions, the U.S. Military Academy, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, and the U.S. Army War College. Since his retirement from the Army in 2014, 2014, he has engaged in many professional and service pursuits, but of course the one we're most excited about is that he is chair of the JCCC Community Veterans Engagement Team. So thank you, Scott, for serving our students and our community. The other folks we have with us, you're going to get more introductions to them as we go through the panel, but I will just briefly mention that we have Al Gorthy, Captain, U.S. Navy retired. Al, can you wave? Yes, thank you. Larry Rennie, Captain, U.S. Navy, retired. And then Tim Owens, also a beloved poli-sci professor here at JCCC, Colonel, U.S. Army, retired as well. All right, so Scott, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ty. So I'm going to go ahead and give a little further introduction to Al, Tim, and to Larry. So Al is a Kansas City native. He's one of 7 children and he graduated from Rosedale High School and also from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And we're going to hear a little bit more about how he began his 26-year Navy career. He retired in 1994 after commanding several squadrons, F-18 Fighter Attack Squadron aboard the USS Enterprise, the Top Gun Adversary Squadron, and an F-18 Training Squadron, and all at the Lamar Naval Air Station, and also the Lamar Naval Air Station. He spent over a decade with the FAA here in Kansas City before retiring from paid occupation. He's now the president of 2 nonprofit organizations serving veterans and the families of veterans. One of those, and how I know Al, is through the Heart of America Patriots Foundation, which has been a tremendously generous partner with the Johnson County Community College Foundation. And Al was telling me that the goal is to actually grow up to being partnered with 21 colleges and universities here in the coming year, and seeking to be awarding over $1 million in scholarships through those 21 institutions. So that's exciting news, Al. It's great to see the growth that the foundation's been able to make. Tim Owens is an Army brat. Okay. His mom was from Kansas and was a WAC, a Women's Army Corps member in World War II. His father was from Newburgh and served in World War II, in Korea, and in Vietnam. Tim graduated from high school in Junction City while his father was stationed at Fort Riley, and Tim always knew that the Army was something that he was going to do. He served in Vietnam from May of 1969 to May of 1970. He returned with the Army to Kansas City, Missouri An interesting assignment. I don't know if we'll get into it or not, but he did transfer to the Army Reserve component after that assignment here in Kansas City, and continued to serve for many years to retire as a colonel, and along the way became an attorney who practiced here in Kansas City after graduating from law school at Washburn University in Topeka, and now is on the faculty here at Johnson County Community College. And Larry Rip Ryan grew up in Gardner, Kansas, beneath the Navy aircraft at the Olathe Naval Air Station. And so, I think you played, saw the planes overhead. Your playmates were all Navy brats.
Well, my best friend in sophomore year was CO's son of the base.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So I think just like Tim, you had a sense of what you might be going to do. And so Rip went to the University of Kansas and was in the Navy ROTC program, graduated with a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, and was commissioned in 1967. He retired from the Navy retired as a Navy captain in 1993, and also left active service and served in the reserves after 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He is a Top Gun plank holder. That is one of the first people to go through the Weapons Fighter Squadron program. They're Top Gun, and was an F-4 flight instructor before leaving active service as the Vietnam War was winding down, and continuing to serve in the Navy Reserves until 1993, first as an aviator, then as a Cold War European theater war planner and NATO General Staff Officer, while simultaneously having a full career as an investment banker, both in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not Pittsburgh,
Mellon
Kansas, yeah, and Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, great. So that's the gentleman's story, and so now we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of how Al began his journey.
What made you decide on the Navy, or military in general, and then specifically the Navy?
Well, and it was a pretty simple decision for me. In 1968, the Vietnam War was pretty hot and heavy, and to be honest with you, I had not even had that on my radar scope. It was I hadn't read much news. I knew it was going on, but I wasn't involved in in much of reading about it or hearing about it or learning about it. But when I wasn't accepted to dental school, I realized soon thereafter that I got my draft notice in the mail. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And I had a very high lottery number, so I knew I was going to get picked. I knew I was going. And so I decided at the time that if I was going to go into the service, I wanted to select the service, the branch that I wanted to go into. And I wanted to do something that challenged me, and I wanted to learn a new skill. And I don't know where I saw it, but I saw this poster somewhere that had an airplane coming aboard an aircraft carrier, and it had Fly Navy on it, and go visit the recruiter at Olathe Naval Air Station. And so there was a phone number there, and I called him up, and he invited me to come out. I took a couple of tests. He said I passed. I'm not sure I did pass, but he said I passed. And then he said I had a date in Pensacola shortly thereafter. So that's pretty much how my career started.
Yeah. And we're going to go ahead and follow that up. So that's how you started. Now, you went through Naval Officer or Naval Aviation Officer Candidate School?
Yes, when I first was selected for the flight training program, we went down there. I was not an ROTC. I was not a naval officer at the time. So I first enlisted as an enlisted man, and the program, the way it was set up at the time, was they would send you through 2 weeks of kind of indoctrination, like everybody goes through this indoctrination program, and then for the next maybe 4 weeks or so, they would send you to this primary flight school just to see if you were aeronautically adapted to flying. And if you were able to get through that 4 weeks, then they said, okay, you know, this guy or gal has potential, and then they send you through Officer Candidate School, which was another 16 weeks.
Okay.
So that's how the process worked at that time.
And so what we saw with Richard Greer and Deborah Winger and an officer and a gentleman had something to do with reality?
Oh, that's absolutely the way it happens.
Okay. Just wanted to check and make sure. Okay. Well, we're going to stay with the Navy theme here because it is the Marines' birthday, and since the Navy gives the Marines a ride everywhere, we need to go ahead and acknowledge that. So if we could go ahead and take a look at Rip's, his story of how he was commissioned.
You didn't have to worry about the draft because you were doing ROTC. You had a plan to go in. So you joined 67.
Well, technically, you know, when you join the NROTC, you're technically in, but your date of rank didn't start until you got your ensign rank there. So, so I was in 62 as a little third class midshipman there, and then kind of worked my way up both the Navy and the engineering school.
So ROTC, graduate, you qualified for aviation as well?
Right, that was all part of the deal. I remember because it was my senior year there at KU. I had pretty decent engineering grades, and Jaime Rickover wanted to send me to a submarine, and I went to my CO and I said, "You got this all wrong. I wanted to be an aviator.
Aerospace engineering,
and the Navy had just spent, I don't know, some bucks sending me out to the local flight school out at Lawrence to get my private pilot's license. I said, this would all be a terrible waste. So he got my orders changed and got me headed in the right direction again. So as soon as I graduated, I got my ensign and degree the same day at Kansas, and a couple of days later, I was on my way to Pensacola.
And so my understanding is that really we're looking at about 2 years total of training to become a naval aviator who's flying fast jets and landing them and taking them off of aircraft carrier decks.
Well, in this particular time frame in Vietnam, they were looking for pilotes at a pretty rapid pace. So they've put us through the training command. What was normally 18 months, we went through in about 13 months. So.
Okay.
So in 67, that's when I started, and then early 68 there got my wings.
Okay. So
my wife pinned my wings on me there. That was a big deal back then.
And they're gold wings and
Gold
not
wings.
those silver wings.
Not
because,
those silver wings the Air Force passes out. Gold wings.
Yeah. So my wife Brogan, who's in the audience, she's a retired Army aviator as well, and I've been well schooled in understanding that aviators, unlike airplane pilots in the Air Force, pilot aircraft. Yeah, so I understand the difference there, and so it's selection or being qualified to fly, going through basic flight school, and then being selected to go ahead and fly jet aircraft.
Well, after you go through the basic training at Pensacola, then they select you to either go the jet pipeline or the prop pipeline back then. So the props or helicopters, one or the other. And so you wanted to make sure you got in the jet pipeline.
Okay. And so that 18 months, 13 months, but it's a long period of time with lots of technical skill being developed over that, and all of it focused, I think, Al, from what you had discussed there, you start learning how to land on aircraft carriers almost the first time you turn back towards the runway.
Yeah, you know, the Navy is obviously, you know, focused on being at sea. And so from the very beginning, once you get into the jet airplane for the first time, this primary or basic flight trainer, your first landing, you start to develop skills that are going to be embedded in you forever and ever and ever. And these skills are going to be repeated every time you land that airplane on the ground, and you will take those skills then with you to the ship for the very first time. So they will harp on you all the time about proper landing technique, and it's very, very precise. You have to be very precise.
And Rip, you mentioned that there'd been a significant investment just to get you to your commissioning.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're talking about over a year, 13 months, 18 months to go ahead and get you all the way ready to go fly to a carrier and begin serving. So I'm under the impression that in doing that, the Navy is sending you to a carrier, probably at sea. Okay, so they've got to know where you're going. And then you land the aircraft, and you get off the aircraft, and you're guided to, this is where you're going to bunk, so your quarters, and you're introduced to the skipper, and you're told, okay, your first mission briefing is this. It happens at this point in time, and then you're put immediately into a rotation, and you have your place on the ship, on the carrier, and in the operations of the fleet, the carrier group that you're a part of.
Well, basically, in Vietnam era, there were two carriers, so you were on from midnight to noon or noon to midnight. So half of your day was day flying and half of it was at night. So you got to be very proficient at night landings, which
Okay.
were
Yeah.
were always the ones that gave you the gray hairs.
Yeah, and we're going to talk some more about those in a bit, but I want to go ahead and ask Tim about his movement into from KSU and the ROTC program there at Kansas State University in Manhattan, and your commission in 1968,
Right.
May of 1968.
June 1st.
June 1st, okay, with orders to Vietnam. And because military intelligence had just become a separate branch in the Army instead of an assignment out of one of the other branches, that you went to the infantry officers basic course, because there wasn't an intelligence officers basic course at that point in time, and it was at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that was what, 4 or 5 months long?
9 weeks.
So your infantry officers basic course was 9 weeks long.
Right.
Vietnam was going on.
Yes.
They needed lieutenants.
Yes.
Yeah, mine was 5 months, so a little bit longer. Not that we learned more slowly.
Well, we went through the ROTC program and then, you know, through all of that, and then by the time that we were ready to go to the basic course, they sent us to, you were going to go to one of the combat arms branches, and mine happened to be infantry.
Infantry.
And so I went down there for 9 weeks and then followed that up with 17 weeks at Fort Holabird in Maryland for counterintelligence training.
Okay, so 9 weeks and 17 weeks, and then you're on an aircraft on your way to Vietnam.
I had a 30-day leave, and then, I left and went to Vietnam.
Moved your pregnant wife up to Upper Michigan, and Tim's son, okay, who was born while Tim was in Vietnam, is here with us tonight, supporting his father. So. Like father, like son, another Army brat.
My wife and son.
It's terrific. It's terrific that they're here with you tonight. So let's go ahead and take a look at Tim's story of how he was received into his unit.
What was your objective, your mission in Vietnam?
Well, I was assigned to the 199th Light Infantry Brigade when I got there. And that was kind of an interesting circumstance. When I reported into the replacement station, I got assigned to 199 LIB, and I had no idea what that was. And they said, well, it's just up the road here, and you'll have a vehicle pick you up tomorrow. And so they did. They came and got me and took me, up the road to Long Binh and to the 199th headquarters. And, I went in, and the young man who was basically, he was a finance corporal. He was there. He said, sir, he said, aren't you, back then 9666 instead of 36, it was 9666 was the MOS then. And I said, yes. He said, well, I think they want you to be in 11 Bravo. They're going to send you out to the 5th or the 12th Infantry, and you're going to be a platoon leader. I said, well, okay, I haven't been through any of that other than going through the infantry school, but so he said, I'm going to let the MI people know. And so he did, and then when I was sitting there going through the books on how to be a platoon leader in the G1 office, or it was a S1 office actually in a brigade, it was a separate brigade. I was going through the books, and they told me, well, you're going to be a platoon leader. We don't need you as an intel officer. In walked the commander of the military intelligence detachment that was assigned to the brigade. And he looked at me and said, are you Owens? I said, yes. He said, don't say anything. We do want you. And he said, they can't send you out to do that if we need you. So I didn't say anything, and he went in and talked to them, and they weren't very happy about it, but I ended up being in my MOS.
So pretty much a different experience than what Al and Rip were.
Well, I'm the only one up here that wasn't flying.
Right.
Yeah, it was a different experience. I was assigned to an infantry unit, and of course I went through infantry school, and so that was predictable.
Yeah.
The intel training was 17 weeks long, and they weren't going to have somebody who did that be assigned to something that you could do in a 9-week thing. It was a pretty expensive program at Fort Holabird.
Okay.
And they needed somebody to do what I did as a counterintelligence officer, and so I fit right in at the time. I fit that, and so that was good. I was real thankful for that little corporal in the finance office that made the little phone call for me. But it was still infantry, and I was with the infantry brigade for
So you're with an infantry brigade supporting the what the infantry brigade was doing, and we'll explore that a little bit more in just a few seconds.
Sure.
Or a few minutes. But I've got to ask, so have all of us seen the new Top Gun movie, Top Gun Maverick? Everybody? Okay. Everybody see the original too? Right? Okay. So I've got two Navy aviators here.
No flight instructors that look like Kelly McGillis.
Okay. But I have to ask, do the movies do a fair job of giving us an idea of how complex it is to go ahead and be conducting flight operations in a carrier group?
Well, I don't know about flight operations and carrier group, but in my opinion, I think that both of those movies, both the Top Gun movies, were the flying part of them was pretty realistic. about what you're going to experience when you go through, either as an instructor or as a student. Rip was one of the instructors, and I commanded one of the adversary squadrons, so we're both very familiar with the Top Gun aspect of training these fleet aviators as they come to us. I thought the flying aspect of both movies were pretty realistic. There was a little bit of sensationalism in there. You know, the last movie was great, great video, great audio, a little bit of, maybe a lot of sensationalism, but it was still pretty. I mean, the aircraft that you see doing the maneuvers, that's real. Okay. That's realistic.
Yeah.
There was no magic done about there, and I'll turn it over to Rip.
Oh, I was never a Super Hornet pilot like you, but in the F4 days, you know, Top Gun was all about how to be a better air combat. It was really focused on the air-to-air.
Yeah.
Where I think, and the first Top Gun movie was definitely focused that way.
Right.
The second one has integrated the more of the air-to-ground in there, and so that's a F4. We did a lot of air-to-ground work, but not like probably the current fleet pilots do. It's all integrated as part of.
Yeah. So we've got a video that where you describe. We'll go ahead and take a look at. We'll take a look at now. So the F4 missions and what you did in Vietnam for two tours aboard the USS Ranger.
Right.
What was the primary mission of? Were you and the F4 in general, or?
Well, the F4 was primarily was designed by the Navy to be an interceptor to go out and protect the fleet, and every once in a while coming over from Hawaii, particularly between Hawaii and Subic Bay in the Philippines, we might be visited by a Russian Bear bomber would come out to greet us, and we would always have to launch some F4s and go out and fly wing on this Bear as it came in, made a pass over the ship and turned around and went back to the airfields up there in Vladivostok, I guess it is. Yeah. So, but if you want to, I've got some pictures of some of my buddies flying wing on a Bear, and the Bear bomber going full speed is maybe 230 knots, and an F4 at 230 knots is barely hanging in the air. So, flying wing on a Bear is kind of dicey. But the F4's main mission was to be fighter cover for the fleet, make sure that no MiGs came out to attack the fleet. We would always have every flight there would be at least 2 Phantoms, either from our squadron or a sister squadron that would be up in the north end of the Tonkin Gulf, flying what they call a bar cap, a barrier cap. And our job was to intercept any bad guys that would come out towards the fleet.
So now you mentioned earlier, so on your tours there in the Gulf of Tonkin, that was 2 carriers were operating most of the time. And Al, was it only with kind of around Operation Linebacker 2 that we saw 5 carriers there in the Gulf?
During the very end of the war in November of '72, there were actually 5 aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin. And as Rip mentioned, 3 of those carriers would be flying a noon to midnight mission. Right. The other 2 would be flying midnight to noon. So there were constantly aircraft in the air over the target all the time. And during Linebacker 2 operation, which was the operation that basically ended the Vietnam War and got our prisoners released, it started on the 18th of December of 1972, ended on the 29th of December of 1972. The prisoners were released in February of 1973, but it was a coordinated effort between the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet and the U.S. Air Force's 7th Air Force.
And Thailand and Guam.
Thailand and Guam, hundreds of B-52s coming out of Guam, hundreds of B-52s coming out of Thailand, hundreds of F-4 and F-105 tactical fighters and attack airplanes from the Air Force coming out of Thailand also, and then the 350 tactical aircraft that the Navy had on their 5 carriers were all combining together, basically attacking these 2 primary cities in North Vietnam, the capital Hanoi, and then the major port of Haiphong, to keep the supply ships from entering. So it was a massive aerial bombing campaign, nothing seen since the World War II, and it finally ended the war.
And at that time, you were flying A-7 Corsairs.
Correct.
And so that primarily a air-ground mission then?
It was a single-seat, single-engine light attack bomber.
Okay. And the F-4 Phantom as an interceptor, you had both a front seater and a back seater.
Rio in the back seat,
Okay, and a Rio is a
radar intercept officer.
radar intercept officer. Okay. And so
The Air Force called them a GIP, the guy in back. Okay. But we call them RIA.
And you mentioned that you also flew some air-ground missions as well.
About every other flight, the F-4s, you have a BARCAP 1 mission, and then later in the day you might fly a strike mission.
Okay.
So we flew a lot of strike missions, but I only had one mission over North Vietnam, but most of ours were interdiction in the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Okay.
So I had have a patch on one of my jackets that says Laotian Highway Patrol. That was our big job.
And I think you, and Al, you also had several missions that took you over Laos.
I never flew over Laos, but I
Okay.
did a lot of missions over south, and then several missions over
over
north.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so, and as you're doing those missions and you're crossing into enemy-controlled airspace, then things can get really exciting.
They're not real happy with you entering their territory. So yeah, they light it up pretty well.
Okay. So, surface-to-air missiles.
A lot of surface-to-air missiles, a lot of AAA, different calibers of AAA. What we did see, and Rip will probably notice this too, is that the Paris peace talks were going on all this time. For those of you who remember the Vietnam War, the Paris peace talks were going on, and they would go on for a specific period of time. And when the Paris peace talks were going on, the bombing in North Vietnam would stop.
Right.
And when the bombing stopped for several weeks or several months, it gave the opportunity for the Russian supply ships to enter Haiphong Harbor and resupply the North Vietnamese with a lot of defensive weaponry. And then once they got their defensive weaponry built back up, the Paris peace talks ended, bombing continued, and then we're back into really fighting a war where there's a lot of weapons coming up at us. So we knew what was going to happen. We didn't appreciate the time that we didn't get to keep the Russian ships from entering the harbor, but that was off limits to us. We knew what was happening, and we knew what the results were going to be. So that was an on-again, off-again war, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we'd sit out there in the Gulf of Tonkin and watch these Russian ships go right by us on their way up to Haiphong, and there was nothing that we could do about it. And they had to offload it, send it down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and then you had to try to catch it there.
And all of that was all those things that were being offloaded and heading down the Ho Chi Minh Trail were coming towards you, Tim. So, yeah, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at really kind of what you did once you got to work in your military occupational specialty there with the 199th.
I ended up doing some rather interesting things as an intel officer, and I ran agent nets and that sort of thing. I had people that brought information in, and I briefed the general on enemy issues.
So tell us about that. What was that like? The nets and such, like.
Well, as much as I can say, basically I had people that indigenous personnel that had information and would give me information, and then I would incorporate it into what any battle plans or anything like that the brigade. It was an infantry brigade, so they had platoons out, companies out, and they were doing combat missions. And so the information that we got as to where the enemy was and what they were doing was critical for their ability to find more things out. And an interesting attachment to our detachment was the Kit Carson Scout Program, which was they were basically expatriated VC that had come over, and they were in a unit, and they acted kind of like the old Western movies, where you'd have Native American scouts that would go with the cavalry and whatnot, and that was how I would equate that. And so we would assign these people to particular brigades or not brigades, particular platoons, and they'd go out with them just like a scout, and they would help them understand what they were dealing with in their mission in combat. And we were responsible for those individuals being assigned to go out. And that was fascinating, learning from them, and they would teach us what not to do, what to be careful for. And so that was a fascinating aspect of the job that I had.
So, Al, Rip, Tim, very different responsibilities in your time in Vietnam and what you were doing. And the technical skill, the technical knowledge, that mastery of the machine and of flying, and especially of the carrier, of landing and taking off of carriers. I really think that's matched in a special way, Tim, with what is required to do the mission that you had as a counterintelligence officer and working with an indigenous population to create a network, an information network to learn what was going on, to build trust with them and your trust in them, and then especially with the Kit Carson Scouts, who were moving with U.S. military units, those platoons, companies on the ground in Vietnam, guiding them towards their objectives and assisting them in accomplishing their missions. And so just the complexity of war, of conducting war at that upfront and very kind of, it's in your face, it's the missiles coming at you, or it's in your face, it's I'm out there with a unit. And I know that I saw several of the pictures where you're out in the villages, you're out there, engaging with the population with what, there's a large insurgent element, right? The Viet Cong are still, that element's still there, as well as the conventional North Vietnamese forces that are being faced. And so I just find it fascinating, and here we have this opportunity to go ahead and bring history, and the big part of history is the story part. And so we're really hearing your stories and learning more about your particular stories and what your Vietnam War was like. And so I just want to appreciate that. And one of the things that I want you to think about now, what would it be like if when you were backing out of or driving out of the driveway of your house, it was a life-threatening situation, and when you got home at night to pull into your garage, that was also a life-threatening situation. And that's the circumstances of not only flying over enemy airspace and getting shot at, but just to get home is a really exciting thing too. So we're going to go ahead and talk in particular about night carrier landings. And so let's go ahead and hear what Al has to say about night carrier landings.
Night carrier landings, there's not too many things that I did in the service. I don't think there was anything that I did that was more demanding more difficult, required precision, absolute precision, very stressful, and very difficult, very difficult. You know, not only is landing on a ship difficult at night, but then you've got the added stress of you've got other guys and gals that are out there trying to do the same thing, and everybody has got to get aboard. So if someone is having trouble, they may delay you from coming aboard, which means you're using more gas. So you've got fuel problems, fuel considerations, you've got weather considerations, you have a pitching deck or a moving deck considerations. There are a lot of considerations out there that make this a very difficult thing.
And if something bad was going to happen around the ship, it was probably a night mission. I had one where I was coming back from the ship and my wingman wasn't able to clear the foul line in time, so I got a late wave off, and the next thing I know, my main mounts are touching down on the end of the angle deck, and the F4's nose is so heavy, the nose just went right on over, and when I saw 20 degrees nose down at the end of the angle, that was an automatic, so my Rio and we ejected out of the airplane. So that was one scary night. One minute you're flying an airplane, and the next minute you're, after fire and fury, you're hanging in a parachute going, well, I survived this much. But when my parachute popped, I'm looking right at flight deck level of the Rangers steaming right at me. So it was like, oh my. And I could see my Rio between the ship and myself. He ejected ahead of me, so he was coming down ahead of me. And according to the plane captain in the A7 that was parked up on the first catapult, Tony's parachute almost snagged the overrun for the catapult. So unfortunately, he landed in the bow wave probably of the ship. We never found my Rio. And there was just enough of a crosswind. We ejected on the port side of the ship, the left side, and there was just enough of a crosswind. When I landed in the water, I landed before the bow wave came. I'm trying to get the straps and everything off and tread water, and boy, the bow wave of something the size of the Ranger is huge. You could surf on it.
And Rip, you got back in an aircraft, kept flying.
A night later, and
A day later.
yep, and the rest of that line period, I flew all night missions.
Yeah, wow.
So
So I just want to go ahead and highlight, again, you're getting home after a hard day's work, and it's the hardest part of the day. That's really, really something.
Well, I think, we were highly trained. Okay, number one.
Yeah.
They're not going to just put you out there without a demonstrated ability first. Okay, they're not going to do that, and so they look at your performance on the field, and then they take you to the ship during the daytime. They see how well you do at the daytime. If your performance is good enough for the daytime, you're going to go out at night for the first time. You have to be night qualified. But as I look back on it, it is very stressful. It is terrifying, and it is very dark. Darkness in the ocean is redefined. Okay, it's just redefined. It is so dark. And when the horizon is taken away from you and there are no lights except for the tiny little lights of a ship, then it is imperative that you learn how to trust your training and not your instincts. It is absolutely imperative that you trust your training when your body is telling you something else. Your body is telling you that you're nose down or nose up or left wing down or right wing down or drifting to the, and the rest of your training says, no, you're not. That is very difficult to overcome, especially when you're coming aboard a ship that's moving at 20 knots through the water and it's moving a little bit and you're flying a very heavy jet at 130 knots. You have to face your fears. You have to push it in the back of your mind. You know what the ship looks like in the daytime. You know it is this big, massive gray structure. And at nighttime, there are just lights. There are just a few lights. And you know this monstrous thing is out there and you can't see it. So you have to just disregard all of those visual distractions that you're seeing and absolutely trust your training. And that is probably one of the most difficult things that that is hard to do, especially if the low fuel light's on.
Yeah, that's,
And you know that you got one shot. You got one chance. You know?
Thank
I
you.
would just add to what Al's saying there. Every landing on a carrier, you're graded. There's a landing signal officer, an LSO, that's on the left side there, right in front of the mirror, and he's talking to you, and he's telling you whether you're low, whether you're fast, what your attitude is like, and he gets in your head just about as he knows what you're doing before you do sometimes, and so there's a lot of trust with that LSO, but there's 4 wires on the carrier, and a green, okay green was what you were looking for. That's a 3-wire there. If you could get that every time, then life's good.
If I can just add to what Rip said there, the landing signal officer is really critical. This individual, you know, he trains you on the ground. He trains you at your home base. He's on the ship with you. He's an aviator. He flies with you. He eats with you. He knows you. He knows your tendencies, and so he knows what you have a tendency to do and not do. And there were several times I can remember at nighttime where I was working just really hard coming in, and he would be talking to me, and then all of a sudden he would say, "Don't." And I'm thinking, what do you mean, don't?
That's a good one.
He knew what I was about ready to do, and he didn't want me to do it.
Don't. Haven't heard that one. That's good.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and kind of lighten up the mood, because that was kind of a really, intense, even just sitting here in the room, a really intense kind of experience vicariously. And so I want to go back to Tim and a story that you've got about helping build a sewer system. So got some questions about that.
One interesting story about that, I had an individual who was one of my sources, who happened to be a security officer in his village. And I'd go out and meet with him, and I asked him if there was anything in particular that he needed. And he said, I don't want any money. I don't want anything like that, because otherwise they'll know that I'm doing something I shouldn't be, and they'll kill me. I said, well, what would you like to have? He said, I'd like to have those, those tubes that your artillery shells come in, where they're shipped in. Can you get me any of those? I said, no, what do you need those for? He said, if you'll come to the village, I'll show you. So I went out to the village, and he showed me what he was doing. And what they did was they took those tubes and they put them together in the village, and they created a sewer system for his village using the tubes from artillery cases, not the artillery rounds or anything, but these were just the tubes that they packed them in when they shipped them. And I got a couple of deuce and a half truckloads of them and took them out there, and they put them all together, and it's amazing what you can do with just that sort of thing. But they made a sewer system in their little village that they didn't have before. So I felt good about, okay, that's a good thing.
I think that's a fabulous story. And were there other things like that?
Well, you know, my job was really dealt a lot with working with people in two ways. One was gathering information as best I could, and HUMINT, which is human intelligence, was a big part of that, where you're out working with the people in the villages and in various capacities. In one village, you might have a Catholic priest who helps you out, you know, and another village is like the security guy that we just heard about. Other times they're just people that want to help you, but they're taking a big risk. But we'd go out and we'd see them, or they'd get a hold of us and let us know that they needed to talk to us, and we'd do that. So that was how we got the information, but it was a two-way street because these people really needed help in a lot of ways. These are like villages that you see it on TV today in some of the areas of the world that are in such need. And these were little villages and little huts that they go into, and you'd see them. And so I wanted to see what I could do to help, but also I think one of the pictures you saw was me walking down the street in the village, and I had all these children around me.
Yeah, you had candy in your pockets.
I had candy in my pockets because I always took candy in my pockets when I went out because I knew somebody's going to want them. And in that picture, there's one little kid who's got his hand in my pocket. I don't know who took the picture, but a little kid reaching in my pocket to get the candy out. But that was how I wanted to be remembered, was helping as much as I could. But on the other hand, I had to help get that information because we had people on the ground who were in jeopardy, and whether it was working with the Kit Carson Scouts or working with the information that was coming in and helping out these different infantry units that were going out. I used to, on occasion, when I was in the rear area, the general would have these briefings every night. And we'd go in there, and I was probably the lowest ranking guy in the room. But he'd call on me, and I shouldn't even say this, but I had a nickname in Vietnam because one of my guys that worked for me was from Kansas, and his girlfriend sent this great big bag of sunflower seeds over there, and so we planted them. They weren't the kind you eat, they were the kind you plant. We planted sunflowers all over around the area. Well, the general didn't really know my real name. Yeah. So he called me Sunflower, and he'd
All right.
There's a little bit more to that story, though.
Well, there is.
Yeah, which is, and I'll go ahead and tell it because I heard you tell it here.
Okay.
Okay. Which is that people would not take their uniforms back with them, okay? But getting name tapes with your name on them was a little bit tough. So one day he might be Tim Owens, and the next day he might be Scott Weaver, you know. And so, you know, so there might have been a reason why your commander didn't know your name,
Well,
but he knew who you were.
Well, I was in the intel unit, and you know, but it was. You could only bring 2 uniforms home with you when you came home. So when you left a lot of uniforms, and so I was a scrounger kind of, and I'd collect uniforms. I had 33 sets of jungle fatigues.
Smith, Jones, Kowalski.
And they all had different names on them, and I didn't change the names, and so I'd walk around with some different name on, and then the sunflower thing, you know, so they just called me Lieutenant Sunflower. But it was, I'd go to the meetings at night, and the general would say, okay, Sunflower, come up here and tell us what's going on. And so I'd go up and give them a briefing on what we were finding out from the information we were getting from our sources that we had. And it was a valuable mission, and then periodically we'd have to go out and see who was in a village that shouldn't be. but also who was there or who wasn't there that should be.
Okay.
And so we did a lot of investigation into who these people were. So it was a very people-oriented job that I had over there, and I dealt a lot with people. And it was, you talked about the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we were at the end of that, and we would do prisoner of war and interrogation. We had an IPW team, but I worked with them and tried to get more information. That was my job, was gathering information. And we'd have people that we captured from coming down the trail. I went one time over to next to us, we had our counterpart Vietnamese unit, South Vietnamese unit, and they were doing interrogations, and they had some rather brutal ways of getting information, and I didn't really think that was what we should do. So anyway, I went over and I asked him if I could interrogate. So I did, and I had this kid, he couldn't have been more than 16, 17 years old. And they were beating him and carrying on, and so I said, look, just let me have him. So we took him into another room, I got him some water and sat down and had my interpreter with me, and we talked to him, and we got a lot of information out of him that he had just come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail as basically, we'd call him in some he was a mule. They had gotten him up north, and they packed him full of stuff to carry down south, ammunition and stuff, and that. So my contact was a very real contact with the real people, and both friends and not. But so that was my job in Vietnam.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so each of you chose to continue wearing the uniform after your tours of duty there in Vietnam and the end of the Vietnam conflict. And so what did you carry with you forward? And I think about my own experience. So gentlemen, you were the generation that taught me to soldier. And as you were growing up there, Olathe Naval Air Station, overhead were World War II pilots
World War II and Korean.
and who'd been taught by World War I pilots. So that reached back, and so, and I know, Tim, the same thing there at Fort Benning, and in your own home with your own father, and just that reach back across and how things perpetuate. So what did your experience in war, how did it affect how you led in the decades that took you to retiring as Navy captains and Army colonel, and what does it mean now?
Well, I had an opportunity to, I was exposed to some tremendous men and women. And at the time, I probably didn't realize how great leaders they were. You just never know until you have time to sit back and reflect on the things that they said and the things that they did for you, and how much encouragement they gave to you, and just what kind of a person they were. And at the time, you don't realize the influence that they have on you. And I think the other thing now that I'm out, I don't think that I have stopped thinking about the people that came before me. You know, you all are supporting the Wreaths Across America, and my wife and I have been involved with that a little bit up at Fort Leavenworth. And I think the one thing that you know, I take away from every time I see a national cemetery, whether it's at Normandy, where we had an opportunity to visit, or Fort Leavenworth or Arlington, you know, I have to stop and think about those people that came before us, and you know, their sacrifice and their service, and you know, I cannot stop thinking about, earning it. I just feel like I have not earned what they have given to me yet, and I just want to continue working as hard as I can to, to make them proud of me.
Thank you.
Just following on with that, I agree with everything that Al just said. I think the thing that I learned coming along, not only from my father, who was, by the way, a counterintelligence warrant officer before me. He actually went in when they first made it a branch. But I learned from him and my mom, who was military when he married her. And all along the way that, and I think I made a comment earlier, good leadership in going forward is surrounding yourself with good people and trusting that they are good people and they know what they're doing for the most part, and being able to captivate that and surround yourself with really good people, and they will take care of you. Leadership is something that's kind of earned. You earn the leadership because they trust you, but you also trust your people. And if you surround yourself with really good people, you're going to do all right. I was very fortunate in having commanded a unit that was actually here local. When I retired, Lawrence and Leavenworth is where my unit was. And I had some outstanding people in intelligence in those units. And we had missions that were very, very fascinating. Information went all the way to the White House. So, right here in little old Kansas. And but surrounding yourself with really good people, I think, is a key thing. And the folks that Al was talking about that went before us, we learned from them. And the sacrifice they made, and giving back, giving something back is really important. I think one of the things that I've thought about through the years, and my son could probably tell you more about this than I, but I was maybe a little bit too strict sometimes. But because I learned in all of that military training, I learned that you follow the rules. There are rules. And rules are not made by fools, usually. Rules are made to be keep us in order, keep things in order, and keep our society in order. And I think all of that. The other things you didn't mention that I did, that I was very, very honored to serve in the Kansas legislature for 11 years.
Yes.
Oh, terrific.
And I used that experience in the military with surrounding yourself with good people to do my job in the House and the Senate as a way to move forward with issues that were important to people around you. And sometimes if you're too strict, you need to back off. But I continue to learn from people around me every day. I learn from my sons. I have two sons, and I'm very proud of both of them. I learn from them every day.
Thank you. Rip?
I'll take a little different tact here. I kind of going back. My grandfather Rennie, who adopted my father back in the Depression era, rescued him from the streets of Wichita, and got him on the straight and narrow. So I don't come by this Rennie name the normal way, but my granddad Rennie, Theodore Rennie, has a brick down there at the World War I Memorial. And he lost his leg in World War I. And even with that handicap, raised his own son, had the generosity to adopt another, And my father went on to serve in World War II. He was a first-class bosun's mate in the Navy. He earned that at NES Olathe. If anybody knows anything about a bosun mate, that's a seagoing rate. So how he made first-class bosun mate, I think it was reading the Blue Jacket manual there. But I was born and he was looking for ways to make rate, and that was the fastest way to do it. So when he got to the fleet, he already had his first-class stripes, but didn't know anything about running the lines on the ship. So he learned a lot fast there, and so I learned a lot from him, from my grandfather, and tried to carry that on as even though I wasn't able to fly as much as I wanted to. I did have a second career in the Navy as a staff puke. So Cinkosnavuur, which was terrible duty. It was right in downtown London.
Yeah, awful.
Awful. And but I did have the chance to take my family with me on a few of those trips overseas, and then ended my career in a NATO billet, which was just fantastic, working with the Brits and the Germans, and was able to run an air desk out of Orières, Portugal there, and ride in a Navy AWACS, NATO AWACS plane, and kind of learn about how to process a war in Europe. So
fascinating careers. Yes, sir.
I wanted to add one thing. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that a lot of where I am was because of the women in my family. My wife is here, and she was a good military wife, and she learned from my mother, who was a good military wife. My mom watched my dad and my brother and I go to Vietnam within 3 years. 1, 2, 3. And they were outstanding support factors for taking care of the family when we were gone. And I think our sons and our family is strong because of that. My grandmother on my mother's side was probably one of the most influential people, but she had all these grandmother-isms that I've lived with for, like, if convinced against my will, I'm of the same opinion still. It's those kinds of things that she imputed, and so I really think that those people that we don't often think about, the people who really support those of us who went to war, those of us who went away, how difficult it must have been.
Yeah.
But how strong they had to be. And I was surrounded by them. So I just wanted to make that point.
Just, I'll make this just real. I attended a veterans ceremony today, and there was one thing that was said that just absolutely got my attention. And that was, we who have worn the uniform, you who have worn the uniform, sometimes people will come up to you and say, thank you for your service. And what is the response? The response is normally, you're welcome. But what would the response, what would it mean to you, and how differently would you think if they would say, you were worth it?
Yeah, that's great. I like that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think all of us would say it was our honor to serve our nation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, gentlemen, thank you for this evening. We're not going to go ahead and have kind of stand up and ask questions, but I do invite all of you to go ahead and if you have questions, please, let's go ahead and continue the conversation one-on-one or in small groups. So with that, thank you, Al, thank you, Tim, thank you, Larry, Rip, for your service.
And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.